This is a follow-up and sequel to the previous video, so to understand what I'm talking about here, please see it if you haven't already done so. Regarding another hypothesis, I'm also going to look at some potential clues from other sources. Okay, the first thing I want to address is the name of the artist. The pronunciation I heard off the internet was Dehira, but I was told it's De'er. Thank you, Ron. Next, the letters being pointed at. What I'd done was, I zoomed in, and as a guide I used the outlines of the finger or manicule to set up the direction the line was to be drawn. I found out, though, that the line can reach other letters and still appear as if it's in the center of the finger. So I can't say with certainty that the letter E in the word face is being pointed at. If there's another clue that lets us know it is the letter E, I haven't found it. However, I still think that Elizabeth's pointing to the letter R in the word rare. There's the base of a column right before the letters in the frame. Starting the line from in between the outlines of the finger, this acts as a guide providing an angle that, if you follow it, directs where Elizabeth is pointing at, to the letter R. Of course, that could be for Regina, Latin for queen, but there's something else here. Using simple gematria, the letter R is equal to 17. Counting from the R, there are 19 letters till the line ends. 19 is equal to the letter T. If we have 17 and T, where's the 4? It's the 4 words that make up the rest of the line, comprised of the 19 letters beginning with the R Elizabeth's pointing at in the word rare. 174T, Edward de Vere's Earl and code number. Like I said in the previous video, it's not the portrait that's encoded, it's the poem around it. It's too bad I can't prove that the E's being pointed at, because if it was, E's equal to 5 and R's equal to 17. 5 and 17 is 22, which is twice 11. However, if we count every letter from the words that are used as part of the codes from the frame, there are a total of 121 letters. 121 is 11 times 11, which is also twice 11. Interestingly, both Sonnets 22 and 121 have references to twice 11, and in Sonnet 22 there's a good example of how M is used for the number 40. I think these are in video 23 and the addendum for video 21 if anyone wants to see the details. Okay, so on the frame we get 4 examples of 1740. There's the one beginning with the R in the word rare. R is equal to 17. There are 4 words and 19 letters. 19 is equal to T. 17 for T. And in the previous video, I showed how there's another code in the lines Virtues of the Three and Vertuous Son, which are 17 and 12 letters. 12 is M, in Hebrew Mem, equivalent to 40, so 1740. The next example, in the middle of the line at the top of the frame, 4 spelled with 2 V's is referring to a number. If you count the words, there are 10 on the left and 7 on the right, totaling 17. With gematria, 4 is equal to the letter D, so we have 174D, a homophone of 1740. And lastly, in the very middle of the top line, there's the double V R character. On the left and right of it happens to be 40 letters. Using gematria, R is equal to 17 and 2 V's equal 40. 1740. That seems to be balanced to me, with 3 sets of 40 or double V on the left, right, and middle. Like I explained in the previous video, this double V R character appears in a code found at the Wilton House Shakespeare Monument. I know that's not absolute proof of its legitimacy, but how commonly does it appear? I don't know, so I'm asking. If anyone sees this video and can answer that, please leave a comment below. If I could get the E situation sorted out, we'd have 2 examples of twice 11. As it is, we have 1 with 121 letters if we add up all the letters from the words used in the codes. There's also what I think's an abbreviated allusion to the De Vere family motto, Vero nihil virius. That's why I believe there's exactly 2 words that begin with VER, and why I think the manicule in the corner is also drawing attention to the period after the letter N. The last word of the poem is 3, but it doesn't end with any kind of punctuation. There's also the TH combination in the, which is also found on the Shakespeare Memorial and gravestone. It only appears on the frame this one time, and I think's another clue letting us know there's something here. This is the end of the poem. Something I didn't notice before was, after it ends, there's no punctuation, but there's a small design hanging from the manicule that looks like a number 8. It's different than the one in the opposite corner pointing at the words about Mary the First. Remember, this is at the end of the poem. If it's 3-8 and we write it like a number, we get 38. Edward de Vere is 4T and 2T, the initials on the cover of the sonnets. One of the ways we get 2 T's is using simple gematria. The letter T is equal to 19, 2 T's equal 38. I think one example of 38 being used to indicate De Vere and 2T is in the first folio dedication epistle explained in another video. I believe this was written to De Vere, and when the 2 pages are put together, the number of the lines of the dedication, not the closing or salutation, just the dedication itself, total 38. Another example I think is Sonnet 36. When you examine the number closely, it's printed to look like a 38. I'm going to return to this sonnet later because for Edward de Vere, I think it's particularly autobiographical, which is why the number is printed that way, to draw attention to it. So if 3-8 or 38 is equal to 2 T's using gematria, could the poem around the frame have been written by Edward de Vere, with this last word or number as a clue? To this point, I'd like to add that the poem is composed of 64 words. 64 is the product of 8 times 8, and using the repeated count, 8-8 or 88 is equal to 4 T's. Notice how Sonnet 64 begins with a De Vere double V. Just like 121 is the product of 11 times 11, I think 64 can be understood as 8 times 8, or 8-8, which is 4 T's. Again, Edward de Vere is 2T and 4T. The last word of the poem is the word 3, followed by what looks like an 8. Using simple gematria, 2 T's equal 38. The poem is composed of 64 words. 64 is the product of 8 times 8. With the repeated count, 8-8 equals 4 T's. Is De Vere responsible for the poem? Or was it done by someone else trying to honor him? If so, why? You see, the painting's conservator says that current documentation suggests the frame is a 19th century reproduction, so there was an earlier version of it. We also know it's not original to the 1572 date of the painting, because the poem uses the words Virgin Queen, and from what I've read and been told, that term wasn't being applied to Elizabeth until the 1580s. So we don't know exactly who or when it was written by. However, going by what I see, I think there's a chance it was written by Edward de Vere. Even if you disagree with my take on where the finger is pointing at, there's still the other examples of 1740, what looks like the Vere family motto, and the numerical equivalent of 2 T's, which in the sonnet stands for Edward de Vere. In the previous video, I suggested the possibility that the hidden message of the painting was that de Vere was the son of Queen Elizabeth. That may contradict the words Virgin Queen, but it's a hidden message, so I don't see that being a problem. Now I want to explore another hypothesis. Looking at the words of these two lines, remember one is 17 letters, the other is 12 letters, which I believe is a cipher for 1740. If the VER words are alluding to Vere, the two words they're referring to are son and three. Virtuous son, virtues of the three. Now when we think of the other hypothesis, that Edward de Vere and Elizabeth had a son, who is it that could be associated with the number 3? Henry Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton. We know de Vere thought very highly of Wriothesley. You can tell that when you read the dedications to him from William Shakespeare and Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. The sonnets are also dedicated to him. Mr. W.H. is simply Henry Wriothesley's initials read like Hebrew right to left. That's all they did to hide who the dedication's for, no great mystery. Notice they're on line 3, and he's the 3rd Earl of Southampton. Looking at the dedication from Venus and Adonis, published in 1593, notice all the double V's. There are 20 italicized V's plus 2 V's printed in Wriothesley's name. 20 and 2 is 22, which is the same as twice 11. Now looking at the dedication from The Rape of Lucrece, published in 1594, where he says, "What I have done is yours, what I have to do is yours, being part and all I have, devoted yours." First, I want to point out that what and were begin with 2 V's. Counting the number of words beginning with what and ending with were, there are 22 or twice 11 words. We know de Vere sometimes signed his name double V and have seen this character used many times as part of other codes. In this dedication, there are 3 of them. Henry Wriothesley was the 3rd Earl of Southampton. I believe this was done with purpose, so what's the significance of connecting Wriothesley's Earl number to de Vere's double V character? I'll return to this later, but now I want to look outside of the Shakespeare works. For more possible codes, I'm going to show you what I found in a couple texts brought to my attention by Christopher Johnson. The Catalogue of Honor, published in 1610, and the Catalogue of Succession in 1619. Both were printed by William Jaggard, who would later print the first folio. Chris is doing a lot of work with the Catalogue of Honor, and you can find his videos under the name Nobody Oxfordian. These are the pages about Edward de Vere in the Catalogue of Honor, pages 700 and 701. Now it's probably a coincidence that if you add up the numbers of 700, 7 plus 0, it totals 7. Had he been king, he would have been Edward VII. The other page is 701. Not counting the 0 and reading it right to left like Hebrew, we get 1 and 7, or 17. Again, probably a coincidence. However, of all the male nobility, his page is the only one printed with this oversized font. That got my attention. The page doesn't really say anything about him, his titles, his father's name, the day he died, and where he was buried. Coincidentally, if you count all the words, not the numbers, but the words in this section, there are a total of 40. And if you count the total number of numbers on the page, there are 17. 17 numbers, 40 words. Notice how the 16 is typeset directly over the 24, looking like a math problem waiting to be added. Well, 16 and 24 equals 40. If we include the only other 2-digit number on the page, the 17 Earl number above, again we have 17 and 40. And there may be a third 1740. Below Earl of Oxford is the month and year from his date of passing, June 1604. June is the 6th month. If you add that to the year, 6 plus 1 plus 6 plus 0 plus 4, it totals 17. In classical Greek, H or ito is used for the long vowel E, and I found other codes where I believe this was used. Here the word the appears 4 times. If H is used for the letter E, then THE can be spelled TEE, giving us 4 T's. If that was intended, then there are a total of 3 examples of 1740 on the page. Okay, now this is what I really wanted to show you. One version of the Prince Tutor theory is Edward de Vere was Queen Elizabeth's son. The poem from the De Vere painting doesn't specify, it just seems like it connects somehow to De Vere. The other Prince Tutor theory is that he and Elizabeth had a relationship, possibly even secretly married, making him her consort. Now let's look at this section. First of all, there's a mistake. It reads his second wife's name was Anne Trentham when it was Elizabeth Trentham. After the title, the second wife, there are 17 words before we get to this. 17 words followed by Queen Elizabeth was second wife of Edward Vere, Earl of Oxford. I know it's only a coincidence, but the way it's typeset, boxed in there perfectly after 17 words, seems like it could be intentional. If there had been a secret marriage or a relationship, and Oxford was or believed he was her consort, it would certainly explain the King de Vere and 740 codes I've found. Now let's see what there is to say about Wriothesley. On his page, after we're given his name, the 17th word just so happens to be father. Edward de Vere was the 17th Earl of Oxford. And after Wriothesley's wife Elizabeth's name, 17 words later is the word Queen Elizabeth. This is at the bottom of the page. Notice the mistake here. Wriothesley's issue is printed as Henry when it should be James. A person who owned this copy crossed it out and corrected it. But if Alexander Watt's theory is correct that Wriothesley was the father of Henry de Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford, then this might have been an intentional mistake. In a previous video, I show how the page in the catalog that mentions Penelope Rich may also allude to this theory. Also on Wriothesley's page, there might be something going on with the collation mark. With gematria, r is equal to 17. There are 5 r's here, followed by a 2. R, or 17, times 5 equals 85. 85 times 2, the number that follows the r's, equals 170. 170 can be added as 17 plus 0, giving us 17. Is that a coincidence? Maybe, but there's another way to interpret this. Again, there are 5 r's followed by a 2. 5 times 2 is 10, for a total of 10 letter r's. Using the repeated count, if we were to count this up to 10 letter r's, it would equal 224. (224) can be understood as 22 times 4, which equals 88. Again, using the repeated count, 88 equals 4 t's. So this collation mark is equivalent to both 17 and 4t, which makes me think maybe it's not a coincidence. From Wriothesley's page in the Catalogue of Honor, let's take a look at the Catalogue of Succession, which was printed 9 years later. The page with Edward de Vere is 176. 1 times 76 equals 76. With gematria, t is equal to 19. 4 t's, or 19 times 4, equals 76. Also, the letters of the name Oxford add up to 76. Just like with the Catalogue of Honor, they get his second wife's name wrong. They call her Anne Trentham. The owner of the text crossed it out and wrote in Elizabeth. Okay, in the Catalogue of Succession, the counts appear to begin from the very top of the page. From there, let's look at line 17. Line 17 reads, Queen Elizabeth, by whom he had issue Henry Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford. For some reason, the owner of the text looks like they wrote a 12, but I don't know why. Now, if Henry Wriothesley was the son of Edward Vere, he would have been Henry Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford. And notice how Queen Elizabeth's name is being pointed at, lining up perfectly beneath de Vere's shield. So we have these two catalogs with curious typesettings, one saying that Queen Elizabeth was Oxford's second wife, the other saying they had issue Henry Vere. Now let's see what the catalog has to say about Wriothesley. First thing, notice it's on page 224. We came across this number earlier on Wriothesley's page in the Catalog of Honor, the 5 R's with the 2 being equal to 224. 22 times 4 is 88, and with a repeated count, 88 is equal to 4 T's. When Henry Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton's name is first mentioned, it's on line 17. Here's where it gets interesting. The section begins with Henry Wriothesley, the 2nd Earl, but beginning with the 3rd Earl on line 17, there are 40 words until the end of the paragraph, with the last words being Queen Elizabeth. In the following paragraph, we get details about Wriothesley, his titles, his wife, and issue. From the beginning of the paragraph, the 17th word is family, and if we keep counting, the 40th word is Vernon, spelled V-E-R, non. The word non indicates negation or exclusion. If we exclude non from Vernon, we're left with V-E-R or Vere. But it might also be suggesting that Wriothesley was excluded from being a Vere. Vere, non. Now with the catalog of succession, I don't think the catch line with the words a catalog are meant to be counted. If I'm right about this, on de Vere's page, after the line about he and Elizabeth having issue, there are 9 lines to the last paragraph end. And similarly on Wriothesley's page, he's first mentioned on line 17. After that, there are 40 words till the section ends with Queen Elizabeth. And just like with Oxford's page, after Queen Elizabeth, there are 9 lines till the last paragraph ends. It's a pattern. 17 lines, information about a Henry and Queen Elizabeth, followed by 9 lines. Now what's interesting about that is, if Wriothesley was the son of Oxford and Queen Elizabeth, he would have been Henry the Ninth. Check it out again. On Oxford's page, there are 17 lines with this typesetting of Queen Elizabeth, with whom he had issue, Henry Vere, after which there are 9 lines. And then on Wriothesley's page, after he's first mentioned on line 17, there are 40 words till the paragraph ends with Queen Elizabeth's name, after which there are 9 lines. Now, is everything I just went over a coincidence? I don't know, but consider for a moment, if Wriothesley was the son of Elizabeth and Oxford, he would have been Henry the Ninth. Maybe that's why on the Sonnet's dedication page, the name Mr. W.H. is the 9th word. It's on the 3rd line, and he was the 3rd Earl of Southampton. We know these are Wriothesley's initials, simply read like Hebrew, right to left, just like the Fiat Lux message covered in my first video. Now, although HW stands for Henry Wriothesley, a W is comprised of 2 V's. So HW, or HVV, could also stand for Henry de Vere. Notice the offset R in Mr. It's a clue. With Gematria, R is equal to 17. In Hebrew, M is mem, equivalent to 40. I think this is more proof we're supposed to read this right to left. When we do, we get the initials HW for Henry Wriothesley and RM, which equals 1740. Also, HW can be read as HVV. Which reminds me of the Venus and Adonis dedication. There are 20 italicized V's and a double V beginning Wriothesley's name, for 22 or twice 11 total. But notice that 2 of the italicized V's, colored in red, don't comprise a double V. Now why would they do that? Why didn't they just print another W for a total of 10 double V's, plus the one in Wriothesley's name for a total of 22? I think they did this because after Rosalie's name, there are a total of 9 italicized double V's. It doesn't make sense they'd split the 10th one up. And it's not because there aren't any more words here beginning with a W. There are 2 more words that do. They did it so there'd be exactly 9 italicized double V's. Why? Is it because Wriothesley would have been Henry the Ninth? Before I get attacked in the comments by people claiming I'm adding more numbers to the list of possible ciphers, that's not what I'm doing. I'm only suggesting 3 and 9 for Henry Wriothesley, not Vere. There has to be context, meaning if there's a bit of information connected to 3 or 9, and that information has something to do with Wriothesley, then maybe it was done intentionally. Like on line 3, the name Mr. W.H. being the 9th word. Considering all the design that went into the sonnets, I would suggest the possibility that this was done with intent, but it has nothing to do with the De Vere cipher numbers. Earlier in the video when I was talking about the frame, I suggested that the last word of the poem, 3, has an 8 painted next to it, making it 38, equaling 2 T's using basic gematria. 2 T's indicates Edward de Vere. Also, Sonnet 36, for some reason, is printed to resemble a 38. Why would they do that? Well, if 38's equal to 2 T's, maybe the sonnet has something to do with de Vere's life. Something very personal. The poet is telling the fair youth that, although their love makes them as one person, they must separate, or the youth will be dishonored by their association. This would be true if Henry Wriothesley, the fair youth, was the illegitimate son of Edward de Vere, the poet. A hint to this may be the line, I may not ever more acknowledge thee. Ever is an anagram of Vere and an abbreviation of E. Vere. So the line might mean that he can never acknowledge Wriothesley as a Vere. I may not ever more acknowledge thee. So is the hidden message in the poem around the frame of the De Vere portrait telling us that Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton, was the son of Edward de Vere and Queen Elizabeth? From what I've read and been told, the name Virgin Queen wasn't used for Elizabeth until the 1580s, several years after the portrait was made, so the poem wasn't original to the painting. And if there's a hidden message contradicting that moniker, I think that's all right because it would have been a message for those in the know. Whatever the case, I do believe the poem is connected to de Vere in some way, whether it's because he's Elizabeth's son or Wriothesley's their son, or perhaps it's simply because de Vere may have written it, signing his double tau initials at the end with 38 or 38, the simple gematria equivalent of 2-letter T's. I want to look one more time at these words from the dedication in Lucrece. Remember, there are 3 sets of double V characters. Wriothesley was the 3rd Earl of Southampton, and double V stands for de Vere. I edited the lines so they appear as a note or letter, beginning and ending with the 2 words spelled with double V. In total, there are 22 or twice 11 words, with the last one spelled double V-E-R-E for de Vere. It's a message from Oxford, obviously dedicated to Henry Wriothesley. I know there are different ways these words can be interpreted, but to me it reads like de Vere saying everything he's done, going to do, and has is Wriothesley's. So are these the words of a devoted friend or a devoted father? Though it is Edward VI depicted in this painting, is the message in the corner of the poem added later, telling us that the virtuous son is Henry Wriothesley, and that it's he, Elizabeth and Edward de Vere's son, who's being pointed at, as Henry VIII symbolically hands the sword of justice to him. Okay, Elizabeth's pointing to the R in the word rare. If it turns out that the manicule in the corner is supposed to be pointing to the word face, could these 2 words mean anything? For centuries it was believed the androgynous-looking person in this painting was a woman, but now it's accepted to be the earliest portrait we have of Henry Wriothesley, showing him around the time de Vere Shakespeare dedicated Venus and Adonis to him. Just prior to that, in 1591, John Clapham dedicated to Wriothesley the poem Narcissus. named after the character from Greek myth, known for his beauty, who fell in love with his reflection in a pool of water and died after staring at it for the rest of his life. Wriothesley's also the fair youth of the sonnets. With the attention focused on the way the young earl looked, the words rare face could be a clue describing a distinct and particular quality of the virtuous son. Of course, I'm speculating because I can't prove with certainty that the word face is being pointed at, though the manicule in the corner does look like it could be. One of the reasons I started looking further into the Shakespeare authorship question and making videos was to see if I could find anything to help support Alexander Waugh's theory that Wriothesley is the father of Henry de Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford. I still believe in the theory, but does it jibe with Wriothesley being the son of Edward de Vere and Queen Elizabeth? Well, maybe de Vere could no longer father children, or after the age of 40 he could have taken a vow of celibacy as part of a spiritual belief. Or maybe he wanted a son from a particular bloodline. If Wriothesley was the father of Edward de Vere's son, then this Tudor child would have been the one Oxford had previously been denied of raising. Though de Vere may have been or believed he was a king through his relationship with Elizabeth, the son who would have inherited his name and titles would inherit his royal blood from Henry Wriothesley. That could have been the reason why de Vere pressured Wriothesley specifically to be the surrogate father. Edward was close to 43 when Henry de Vere was born and technically would have been his grandfather. Wriothesley would have been Henry de Vere's father, but in a way they would have also been brothers. Alexander Waugh and Alan Green have both made videos about this engraving. Waugh makes an excellent case for it being evidence of Wriothesley and Henry de Vere as father and son. Green's case is also interesting, though he suggests that these are two brothers. Could it be both? In his videos, Where is Shakespeare Really Buried?, Alexander Waugh demonstrates that the rebuses from the Sonnet's dedication grid tell us there's a paternity lie in Vere's line. Henry Wriothesley is Henry de Vere's father, which is why Oxford was sine prole mascula, or without male issue. In between Vere's paternity lie and Vere's line, I found a rebus explained in video 5 that's in the shape of a set of scales with the words ensuing sun, Henry 4T, and tela rose. Tela means cloth or fabric in Spanish and has a similar meaning in Italian, so tela rose is rose cloth. Also, reading the words right to left, they spell Rosetale. Like the words listen and castle, if the T is silent, the pronunciation is Rosalie, which is how we've been pronouncing Southampton's name. The rebus messages are trying to tell us about the birth of a son. This one's a set of scales, which is Henry Wriothesley's birth sign. Other rebuses tell us there's a paternity lie in Vere's line, and that he's without male issue. The words of this rebus are ensuing son, Henry 4T or Henry Oxford, Wriothesley, and rosecloth. Everything hinges on the interpretation of what all this means. Is it telling us that Henry Wriothesley is an Oxford? It is his birth sign. Or is it telling us that Henry Oxford or Henry de Vere is a Wriothesley? And the meaning of rosecloth, is it that the son, Henry Oxford or Henry de Vere, is from the same cloth or fabric as his father, Henry Wriothesley? Or does rosecloth stand for Tudor garment, referring to the Tudor royal mantle worn by kings and queens as a symbol of authority? If that's the correct interpretation, then whoever this message is referring to is royalty. But is it Wriothesley, or is it both he and Henry de Vere? The son Oxford had with Anne Vavasour, born in 1581 and named Edward Vere, doesn't appear as issue in either the Catalogue of Honor or Succession because he was illegitimate. So if Wriothesley was Edward de Vere's illegitimate son and Henry de Vere was Wriothesley's son, then Edward de Vere is without male issue. He has a son he can't recognize, Henry Wriothesley, and a son, Henry de Vere, fathered by another man. If this is all true, then Vere's paternity lie is that his line is illegitimate. Therefore, he's without male issue. Then the message of the Libra scales rebus may be that Henry IV or Henry Oxford is the son of the Libra, Henry Wriothesley, and that they're royals, symbolized by the Tudor garment or rose cloth. This engraving might also have a similar message in that it bears the globus cruciger, the orb and cross, a symbol of royalty and monarchy. Though the image is based on an earlier one of King Frederick V of Bohemia and Gabriel Bethlen, Prince of Transylvania, they're actually two separate engravings. To learn more about this and the meanings of the various details, please see Alan Green's video, The Fisher Kings. Something I want to address real quick before I start to wind down, taken from the 1590 anonymous version of the De Eyre portrait covered in the previous video. Edward de Vere never became a Knight of the Garter, but Wriothesley did. If there is a message hidden in the letters of Henry VIII's Garter, could it be referring to de Vere's illegitimacy or Wriothesley's? I know some who see this will disagree with what I've presented here, and that's all right. I get correspondence with different views on the Prince Tudor theory, and I wanted to make a couple videos presenting what they've shared and what I've found while looking for de Vere's Shakespeare codes. It's true, though. Only DNA is ever going to tell us if Elizabeth had a secret royal bloodline. Whether de Vere was Elizabeth's son or if Wriothesley was their child, there is no definitive proof. Like I've said before, I'm just pointing out things I found, and you can decide for yourself what to believe. As to a relationship between Edward de Vere and Queen Elizabeth, I'm going to read something from The First Elizabeth by Carolee Erickson, published in 1983. It's not a book about who wrote Shakespeare or any kind of Prince Tudor theory. De Vere is only mentioned on a couple pages, but what Erickson has to say about him is interesting. Prominent among these favorites was Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford, a boyish, hazel-eyed young courtier whose expression combined poetic languor and aristocratic superciliousness. Oxford excelled at those courtly graces Elizabeth admired. He was an agile and energetic dancer, the ideal partner for the Queen, and he had a refined ear for music, and was a dexterous performer of the virginals. His poetry was unusually accomplished, emphasis mine, and his education had given him a cultivated mind at home with the antique authors Elizabeth knew so well. He was an ideal companion for her, except perhaps the 17-year age difference that separated them, and she was said to delight more in his personage and in his dancing and valiantness than any other. Rumor-mongers speculated about Oxford's talents in the bedchamber and whispered that he was gambling all, including marriage, on becoming her preferred lover. He was no longer sleeping with his wife, the gossip said, for fear of losing the preferment he hoped to gain by making love to the Queen. Erickson cites the letters of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scotland, so is this reliable? And if it is true, did it result in a child? Think what you will about the De Eyre portrait, but the frame has these examples of 1740. An example of twice 11, possibly 2. What looks to me like the Vere family motto, and equivalents of 2T and 4T, so I think there's a chance Edward de Vere had something to do with the poem in the frame. Now, whether or not there's a message about Vere's son being Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton, I really don't know. But I think I have found some things, like the rebus, typesettings, line, letter, and word counts, that beg the question, exactly what was their relationship about? A father and son? An older man who wanted a prince to father his child? Both, maybe? I believe the answer might be in the message of the rebus. One more thing I want to say about it is that the central column, Henry 4T, is in column 12. 12 is M and Hebrew mem, equivalent to 40. And the arms, ensuing son, begin and end in columns 7 through 17. Had he been king, Edward de Vere would have been Edward VII. The ensuing sun rebus is set to Edward de Vere's King, Earl, and code numbers 7, 17, and 40. Coincidence? I'm not so sure, because if you add these numbers, 7 plus 40 plus 17, they total 64. 64 is 8 times 8, and 88 equals 4 t's using the repeated count. If you turn to Sonnet 64, it begins with a double V and has other bits of coded information covered in a previous video. But also, it's on the page with the 9th line of verse reading, "And all those beauties whereof now he's king." Again, Wriothesley would have been Henry the Ninth. And if you count 18 lines of verse from the bottom, his beauty shall in these black lines be seen, with a single bracket for no reason at all other than to draw attention to it. This is in Sonnet 63, and if you add 6 and 3, you get 9, and 6 times 3 is 18. I know, a lot of coincidental number stuff. Then there's this. If you count the column numbers exactly as they appear, 7 plus 12 plus 17 equals 36. I'm not saying 36 is a cipher number, but if you turn the page to Sonnet 36, it's the one where the number's been altered to resemble a 38. 38 is 2 t's using simple gematria, and the sonnet, which I explained earlier, is about the poet telling the fair youth that, though their love makes them one, they must separate, or the youth will be dishonored by their association. Connecting this sonnet and what it's saying through number to Wriothesley's birth sign, I don't know. Is it two friends with a special relationship? Or is it a father telling a son that he may not ever more acknowledge him? I want to thank Christopher Johnson for the catalogs of honor and succession, Ron Raphael and John Boss for their correspondence, and Alexander Waugh for his support. Some things I feel very certain of. Others I think are merely interesting and want the information out there in case anyone's seen or found something similar. Maybe it'll click and these hypotheses can get resolved. Thank you for watching.